All right, so welcome to today's episode club. It is April 7th. Time is starting to lose meaning, but I hope everyone's doing okay. It's been really kind of dark and dreary here in LA lately, that I can see from my window, from my safe social distancing distance. Today we're going to talk about a couple Next Generation episodes, and we are going to talk about a Futurama episode for the first time, which is fabulous, and I'm so excited. It will not be the last time we talk about Futurama, because it is my favorite. And someone messaged me earlier, I did bite my lip today, so that's how I'm doing. And, but it's fine. Thanks for your concern. I did realize I basically assigned, 4 hours of homework for people with all of these episodes because I forgot that Time's Arrow is a two-parter. I can't believe I forgot that, but I did, and it is a two-parter. And yay, hey, welcome. But it's great. It's still really, really good, and we've got a lot of time travel stuff to discuss. So we did time travel last week. With Deep Space Nine, we talked about the Visitor and Trials and Tribulations. This week, we're talking about two Next Generation time travel episodes that are pretty significant and then allude a lot to the Futurama episode that we'll be talking about at the end. So first, I want to talk about TNG's Cause and Effect. Now, if you don't remember this is the episode where the Enterprise is stuck in a time loop, and Beverly Crusher is the first one who starts figuring out what's going on, that she has terrible deja vu and knows something weird is happening. And she starts to figure out that they're stuck in a loop, and then they slowly start to figure it out, and then we have to watch the Enterprise get destroyed over and over and over again. It's pretty intense, but it's good. Thoroughly enjoy it. So this is season 5, episode 18 of Next Generation, and it kicks off basically with them saying, we're losing antimatter containment. And this is a thing I mentioned on our First Contact watch through that I live tweeted on First Contact Day over the weekend. Happy First Contact Day. Where antimatter containment is not necessarily a thing that we have now, but antimatter is a real thing. So there's matter and there's antimatter. And when matter meets its antimatter counterpart, it basically, you have matter, you have antimatter, they meet and they evaporate into radiation, electromagnetic radiation. Most antimatter particles that we've discovered are pretty short-lived. So this idea that you could have antimatter containment, I don't think is necessarily something that we have figured out. But that's okay. The whole premise is, if you watched this episode lately, you watched it a dozen times where they're stuck in the Typhon Expanse, or they're exploring the Typhon Expanse, which they say they're the first Starfleet vessel to be here. We'll come back to that. They don't really come back to that later, but we will. They're playing poker, which is fabulous, and Geordi is dizzy. He's experiencing vertigo, and they start to feel some sort of deja vu thing. Now, they are saying that this expanse is huge. It's very, very big. It's an expanse, as one might say. And they need to launch a probe soon in order to be able to explore the far star system, which is all good. They ask about the luminosity studies. Riker asks how the luminosity studies are going. So, of course, that's why we're here. And Geordi says that the flux spectrometers are off, that they need to be realigned, which he really means calibration. They need to be calibrated. Mass Effect fans out there. Got to do some calibration. And so flux spectrometers for a luminosity study is valid. Flux spectrometers, spectroscopy, you're studying the spectrum of the stars, basically. And luminosity, you're just figuring out how bright it is. So luminosity means the brightness, relative brightness of the stars. And spectroscopy is the study where you actually see the spikes at different frequencies that tell you what that star, whatever you're looking at, is made up of. So, for example, hydrogen is the most prominent element in our universe, and we do spectroscopy to try to find hydrogen, for example. When we're looking for other galaxies, they're big sources of hydrogen. The way hydrogen gives off light is its electrons are bouncing energy levels. When they decay an energy level, so because they're warm, they absorb energy. When they decay, they give off a specific frequency. We call it the 21 centimeter line. So it's radio astronomy because that's the wavelength that it's at. And so spectroscopy is how we look at stars. It's how we study. It's how we study the universe. Basically, it's everything that we've been doing except for now we have gravitational wave radiation. That's more like it's not actually, but it's like hearing the universe. Whereas we've always done electromagnetic studies, looking at these spectra and doing analysis of that. So using a flux spectrometer, I mean, that's kind of, it's also, you know, people work in the entertainment industry, you measure the flux, you're measuring brightness, you're measuring the light. So that's all valid. And then, they were so close. So they say that the flux spectrometers are offline because the Stellar Dynamics lab needed to install new modules. And at first I was like, why are they installing new modules? Because they're exploring a new, because they're exploring a new region. You would want them to constantly be online. And then I realized if you're in a new region, you might be able to, you might want, maybe they were like, oh, there's something weird here that we want to install these new modules. So we got to get on that. And they're frantically trying to install it, forgetting that like this place is really big and they need to launch these probes really soon. So Data then turns and says, yeah, upgrades, new modules. So they're upgrading their system somehow. Data turns around and he's like, well, in lieu of our flux spectrometers, we can use graviton polarimeters. And they're like, oh, good idea. Get on that. Gravitons are theoretical, but they're theoretically the particle component of gravity. So if you think of gravity as a force, if it has a particle component, which we've never discovered, that's part of that grand unified theory. If it has a particle component, people have said they call it the graviton. So that would be gravity. Doing a luminosity study is electromagnetic radiation. That's photons. So if he said the photon polarimeters, maybe we could get away with that. You don't really polarize, photons aren't really polarized, but we can, well, this whole light and particle thing. You could still say that. It would be kind of the wrong thing, but you'd basically be putting sunglasses on the ship to study the polarized light, essentially, that's coming from it. I've just dug a hole. Hey, how's it going? So I've dug a hole for myself, but they dug a bigger hole when they said, in lieu of the flux spectrometers, then we can use graviton polarimeters. That would not help. Studying gravity particles to do a luminosity study, not super work. But that's okay. It's adorable. We love it. We'll roll with it. Sure. Okay, so then they get an alert that says there's a weird reading that's 20,000 kilometers off the starboard nacelle, and that's close. For space terms, that's close. Like our, geo satellites are kind of in that thousands of kilometers region, tens of thousands of kilometers. So that's not crazy to say. That they're almost on top of it. They realize it's a localized distortion of the space-time continuum. Perfect. They basically have found a weird bubbly thing in space that they've detected this anomaly. Again, this is all kind of Star Trek land. But a localized distortion of space-time is a valid thing. That could be the presence of mass. It could be dark matter, right? Dark matter distorts space-time. It doesn't give off any light, but it distorts space-time. It could be a weird anomaly. All we're saying is that trampoline of space-time that they're hanging out on has been distorted somehow. So, I'm good. All right, let's roll with that. And it starts fluctuating. The ship basically starts going kablooey. Bad things are happening. They're not able to escape. There's a huge energy buildup. And then a ship flies out of it. And they're all like, what? and they try to get out of the way. There's a collision in 36 seconds. I did the math. If they were 20,000 kilometers away and it's in 36 seconds, they're traveling at 555 kilometers per second, which is 0.0018 times the speed of light. Not relevant, just fun. About 500 kilometers per second is how fast that ship is booking it out of there. It's what I do. So they decide to use a tractor beam, which always cracks me up, right? They have 36 seconds to get out of there. This has nothing to do with the science. It's just funny because we had to watch this scene in this episode like half a dozen times. They're like, oh, there's a ship coming on a direct collision course. Try hailing them. No, they didn't hail. Cheers, Zach. Nope, they're not answering. Okay, shields up. Shields aren't working. What are we going to do? And then Riker has the idea to open up the shuttle bay and have the gas that's leaving push the ship out of the way. Awesome. Action, reaction. Newton's first law. No, not Newton's first law. Newton's first law is inertia. Action, reaction is the third law. Woohoo! Still remembered it. Yeah. I love it. Everyone was super on that. I remembered it before I saw it. And, yeah, they're like, shields up, weapons online, no shields, buckle up, get out of there. What are we going to do? He says, open up the shuttle bay doors. And then Data's like, Captain, we could maybe use a tractor beam to get them out of the way of our path. And they're like, oh, that's a good idea. Engage the tractor beam. And I'm like, you have seconds. Data should just be like, tractor beam, get out of the way. But that's just storytelling. I'm just being goofy about that. It's because, again, we watched it like 6 times and I was like, talk faster. But anyway, it doesn't work. They aren't able to actually get out of the way. It grazes a nacelle and then bad things happen. Cascading effect. And then it starts all over again. And like I said, as the story goes on, they start to realize they're all like having deja vu. And they figure out that something weird is happening. They realize that Geordi's headaches. So after the poker game, Dr. Crusher is called to the med bay because Geordi is there because he experienced vertigo. He's had like a dizzy spell. And she's like, it has every symptom of an inner ear infection, but it's not. And I don't see any physical infection. Then they start to realize the 5 million Masons. Yeah, I know. Just, I mean, they are close, but it's still, they had 30 seconds. They could have got out of the way. That's all we're saying. But it's okay, because it's a good story. And I really do like the resolution of this. So they realize that Geordi's headaches, again, this is like on the third loop that we're able to do this. Yeah, and they forget every time. So it's this idea that like, I'll come back. I'll explain this all in more detail, but their memories are basically wiped every time, except they start to remember bits and pieces. And remember, Crusher 2 is starting to, Crusher's hearing voices when she's going to bed. And then Geordi has this, she realizes that it's an ocular problem, that it's not necessarily an inner ear infection, that there's something going on with his visor. And, they mention that there's a phase shift in the visual receptors, which kind of works because we don't have a ton of information on how Geordi's visor, that we've had a lot of things alluded to it, but it's taking in the light that Geordi's eyes can't process and translating it into something that his brain can process. But if there is a phase shift in that, then all the light that's coming in is going to be slightly offset and it wouldn't be able to process it really well. So that's not crazy as an explanation. And it's starting to give him headaches. And so there's all this phase shifted images that are being sent to his receptor, but they're not there. It's in the same way that Crusher's hearing these voices that aren't there. And other people on the ship are reporting that as well. Geordi's like, his visor's picking up light that's not really there. So could be they mentioned it could be a subspace, like warp field, some sort of subspace thing is interfering with his visor. And but they're not able to figure it out. One thing that I like is that Crusher she's like the first person that starts really kind of figuring out what's going on, that something weird is happening, and she tries to do something different. She's having a nighttime sherry. Can we just appreciate the fact that Crusher is having a little glass of sherry before nighttime, which I think is personally a little bit of a hint as to what is coming later. But she's having a sherry, and she's like normally putting it down. It's super classy. Putting it down before she's going to bed. And she decides, she super hesitates, and then she like changes it slightly. So Crusher's like playing with changing these initial conditions. And essentially the whole theme that we're getting to with this episode is kind of has to do with chaos theory, right? That if you have, so chaos theory, most people just know chaos theory as Jeff Goldblum being his best Jeff Goldblum sense, dropping water on Laura Dern's hand. And explaining that little changes to the hand, even if he's dropping the water in the same position, are going to fall down differently every time because they have very tiny changing initial conditions cascade into bigger effects. And this is chaos theory. And in math terms, it's nonlinear dynamics. If you've seen chaos pendulums or anything, you can try to start at the same time every way, but every little thing will start to amplify and you get a totally different pattern every time. And so with time travel, if you're stuck in this loop, but you're changing what's happening a little bit every time, it could have a cascading effect to change kind of what happens later. That's not totally the direction the story goes, but it starts to hint at that a little bit with her deciding to set, her glass down in a separate spot than the way that she's always done. She's starting to change that loop. She's starting to break the loop by doing that. They start to... Well, she basically is starting to push this and start asking around what's going on and wanting people to do some more analysis, and she's hearing those voices, so she basically gets Data and Geordi to study these distortions on the ship, and they're picking up Dechion field distortion. Dechions are a Star Trek thing. I always like to say, because I don't like saying it's a Star Trek world versus a real world, because for a lot of us, Star Trek world is very much a part of our real world, so it feels kind of mean to say it's in the real world versus the Star Trek world. So I like to say in the pre-Cochrane world. In the pre-Cochrane, so Zefram Cochrane, the guy who invents warp drive, total Star Trek thing, but kicks off Star Trek. In the pre-Cochrane world, the not Star Trek realm, Dechions are not a thing. In the Star Trek world, we've encountered them not just in this episode, but in additional episodes, where they are basically a subspace particle, or not a subspace, sorry, a subatomic particle. Like gluons are a real subatomic particle. Dechions are a made-up subatomic particle that has both a space and a subspace component. So I'm fine with that, because this is science fiction. So the space component, gluons, which are a subatomic particle, they are basically the fundamental particle for the strong nuclear force. They hold atoms together. They glue them together. They're called gluons. They're subatomic particles. Dechions, we don't know what they do, but they have both a space and a subspace component. So they live in both space and subspace. I'm okay with that. This is Star Trek. We have to touch subspace. So that's all cool. That's all good. But they're picking up these field distortions from Dechions. Okay. And they start to realize that they're stuck in a temporal causality loop. And you can kind of guess that maybe they figured this out because they are... because if Dechions are a subspace subatomic particle, then it's present when there's something weird going on in space-time. And they have this distortion that's going on, and they're picking up all of these Dechions. So Geordi starts to figure out that that's what's going on, and he's like, we could be here. We could have been in this loop for days. I could have explained this to you over and over and over and over again. Could be hours, could be days, it could be years that we've been stuck here. And we're like slowly starting to chip away at this. And this brings up a really fundamental concept in time travel, which is called entropy, we're going to come back to this a lot through this entire thing with all of these different episodes. And entropy, if you remember, is time's arrow, right? So if you remember nothing else, the arrow of time is entropy. And it's this idea that entropy is the amount of chaos that we have, the amount of disorder in our system. And as time progresses, as we progress, we have no control over it. At 1 second per second, disorder increases. If you never clean your room, over time it will get messier. It won't just suddenly organize itself. It's a really goofy way of explaining entropy, but it works. And the universe does this. The universe gets messier as time progresses. Exactly. And so when you talk about time travel, yeah, so can I. As you talk about time travel, time's arrow is that if you go from more ordered to more disordered, you can figure out what happened before the other thing. So I hope that makes sense. I know it's a little hard to wrap your mind around. Time travel in general is always hard to wrap your mind around. But if you're able to sort of measure the amount of disorder, you can figure out what event has happened before what. Aging is similar. So so that's what made me think about this, right? When they say that they could have been here for years, would their bodies be aging, or are they violating entropy? Because technically, right, I said that really snobbily. I didn't mean to. But technically, if they are constantly still being thrown back in time, their ship and them are still going to experience entropy. They're still going to age. So that's not what they're doing. They're basically, every time they get sent back, they stamp the reset button and everything gets reordered, violates the law of entropy, which is why like time travel doesn't really work very well for people. I hope that makes sense. Okay. Anyway, they figure out that they might be there for years, and then they're like, well, how do we get out of this? And they're like, maybe us trying to get out of this is what's causing the Enterprise to be destroyed. Is there an argument that something else gets disordered to make up for their reorder? Yeah, you could. I mean, you could make that, but we don't see that in the physics realm. We don't see that because entropy always has to increase according to thermodynamics. You don't have this trade-off where it's like, okay, if this gets reordered, this has to get more disordered. It's always just going to everything's going to progressively get more and more disordered. But I like that, though. That's good. Question about tachyons. I'm not going to spend too long on it because we do have 2 more episodes to get through. But tachyons don't always exist when a ship is going faster than light. Tachyons are particles that always travel faster than light, and they are the byproduct of going at warp, but they also exist when you travel through time because you violate causality. And tachyons, which are theoretical particles, we've never discovered them, but they exist theoretically outside of the Star Trek realm. Because they always travel faster than the speed of light, they would be a byproduct of time travel because they violate our whole understanding of causality. And I actually have an episode on my YouTube channel all about tachyons if you want to learn a little bit more about that. But they're trying to figure out how to get out of this time loop, right? They say, maybe avoiding it is what causes us to die. This Decyon emission is coming. It's this echo from these loops that are constantly going on. So they realize if they can manipulate the Decyons, again, fictional particle, but if they can manipulate the Decyons, they can send a signal because like Geordi's visor's picking up these things. Yeah, no worries. Because Geordi's picking up these images because crew members are hearing echoes of voices of people talking that they figured out that there was this collision that happened. They can manipulate the Decyons to send some sort of signal back. So if we're able to see tachyons, that wouldn't necessarily confirm that time travel or faster than light travel exists. That would not be like a cause and effect detection, if that makes sense. We should do an episode all about tachyons because they're fun. And they show up a lot in multiple science fiction. So Data's there. They've like reprogrammed him to be like, where it's like not all tachyons would result from faster than light travel or from time travel. It would be hard to wrap our minds around Tachyons are tricky. Living outside of the standard timeline starts to break your brain pretty quickly. Super quickly. So they go through, so they figure out that they need to send a pattern. They think, okay, we're only going to have a split second, but if there's some way Data can manipulate the Dechyons to send a signal into this echo that can be picked up in this loop, then maybe we would be able to get out of this. And so they're going through their whole thing. We're seeing the ship explode again, and they're like, maybe we should use the tractor beam, Captain, as the ship is going towards us. I'm sorry, it's just he talks so slow when he's bringing it up. But I get it. And then the collision happens again. It doesn't work. And then Data's like, he quickly punches something into the signal generator, and then they explode. And then the loop starts again. And they're playing poker. And the first indication that they were traveling through time was the fact that they all kind of knew what cards were going to be drawn. But Data's like playing, he's dealing out the cards, and he deals a 3, and then a 3, and then a 3, and then a 3, and then another 3. And he keeps dealing 3s. And so everyone's like, well, that's weird. And they're still experiencing deja vu, or nip-po, as the Klingons say. Nip-po for deja vu. It's your Klingon lesson for the day. But they keep seeing 3, and they realize Data detects 2,085 anomalous examples of the number 3 showing up. And so he's like, okay, there's got to be something here. They've figured out that this signal is there. They run a pattern matching algorithm, which is valid. You're basically on the number 3, like, hey, find out where all the 3s are showing up, and let's see if there's any pattern to it. That makes sense. Again, they start to go through the whole loop. They keep seeing the number 3, so it's slightly different this time, but it's still happening as they remember it. And then right at the last minute, Data is like, nope, I'm decompressing the shuttle bay. And the decompression happens. Newton's third law of motion, action and reaction, works as it should, which makes us all happy. And and we're like, how did he figure it out? Because you get that, like, that Data where, you know, you can see Data is processing things faster than what's happening in real time. And he explains that the 3, and I do love this, and I manage to forget this every time I watch the episode, but the number 3 is the number of pips that told Data to go with Riker's method, which is like obscure and weird, but if it works for Data, then it works for me. I just love it. It's bizarre and hilarious, and it's fabulous. I did not do the numbers on how big the shuttle bay must be to move it sufficiently. And now I'm disappointed in myself. I will report back. But you do, that's a lot. I bet if I started, I would have given up. Because you would have to figure out the rate at which it opens, which you can kind of see. You'd also have to know the mass of the Enterprise, if the Enterprise is still, or if it's drifting. And I don't know how fast it needs to go. Although I do know how fast the ship coming is moving, because I did calculate that. But I do like that question. I'm sorry. I feel like I failed. But yeah, you guys get it. Anyway, and then, so right at the very end, the ship that comes out hails them. And, well, even before they do that, they access he says, access the Federation time-based beacon, which is awesome. So apparently they have these beacons, like buoys or buoys, set throughout the galaxy, or I guess through the quadrant, that carry real time. Like, I kind of love that, right? That it's like it manages universal time. It's like they have these time beacons that are universal times. Thank you, Phoenix. I can always rely on these people. We will do the calculations. I will take the homework assignment and see if we can figure out how big the shuttle bay needs to be to move out of the way. I love it. So they have like so what this is telling us is that the galaxy, or at least the quadrant, the Federation, operates on a universal time that is managed by these time beacons. And so you can compare your ship's time to these time beacons to see if weird things happened, because weird things happen when we're traveling the galaxy. And they realize that they are off by 17.4 days. So they were stuck in that time loop for 17 and a half days-ish. And then this ship hails them, and they're like, this is a Soyuz class that we haven't seen in 80 years. And it's the USS Bozeman, and it's Space Fraser! I love me Space Fraser. Yeah, it's like Space GPS. That's a really good analogy for it. And I just kind of love that concept that they did that. And he's like, what's up? Cool ship. I haven't seen that ship before. What are you doing here? Do you need help? And they're like, no. Sir, do you? Because your ship's old and you're wearing old uniforms. And they're just like, when do you think it is? And they thought that it was 2278. They've been stuck there for a long time, which sucks for them. But again, there's no record of a Starfleet vessel having explored this expanse. So, bizarre. I know. And one of my lesser known things is that I love Frasier. I can quote every episode. I used to play a drinking game with friends where we would drink sherry and we would take turns throwing in like Frasier DVDs, and the person who could guess the episode the fastest. I was really cool. I still am really cool. For those exact reasons. But I love Frasier. I love Frasier. It's like my family. And you know what? I owned them all on super tangent, but it's Kelsey Grammer. I owned them all on VHS. Then I owned them all on DVD. And I'm going to have to put in my DVDs because I could really use that show right now. Yeah, right? And when I find people who are also Frasier obsessives, it's a bond. So yeah, I love that show. It's like my family. Every time I'm homesick or need a hug, Frasier's always been there for me. Anyway, Space Frasier, which made me laugh because I knew he was coming, and I'm glad you're finding this hilarious. But I love that show so much. But I definitely, because you saw that Kelsey Grammer is in the show, right? And so for me, it's exhausting to spend 40 minutes being like, is Frasier here yet? Is Frasier here yet? Is Frasier here yet? And then you see Beverly Crusher like drink a sherry before she goes to bed every night. And I'm like, that's because of Space Frasier. He's definitely there. Anyway, yeah, hilarious. Anyway, we're going to run out of time super fast. Actually, even though the next episode was a two-parter, so we're going to talk about Time's Arrow now, which is Entropy, as we just discussed. But Time's Arrow is the two-parter, end of season 5, beginning of season 6, and very good set of episodes. Not a ton of science in them. So we'll get to the Futurama one pretty quickly, and we'll still be able to do this under an hour-ish, so... Anyway, they get called out to Earth, to Sector 001, because there's evidence that extraterrestrials were on Earth in the late 19th century. And everyone's like, what? And so they go, and they're in a cavern near San Francisco. Yeah, that holds up. I just ran through the episode really fast, because they show Starfleet, and then they're showing the cavern. And they were I love this, they were setting up seismic regulators in this cavern because they're in San Francisco. It's great, right? And so they set up this seismic regulators. That would be awesome. Because it's earthquake country. So they have seismic regulators. I'm going with that. That's I love that. But they're having issues setting them up because there's like these waves. They call them triolic waves. Triolic waves. And triolic waves are made up. They're not a thing. They say that triolic waves, all we know about them is that literally define them. They are the byproduct of an energy source that's used by only a few species due to its detrimental effects on human tissue. They don't necessarily say if it's the energy source that has detrimental effects or if the triolic waves are the source of the detrimental effects. They do worry about their exposure to these waves, but remember they're a byproduct of this energy source. Yeah, exactly. So then they find Data's head. Go to credits. And awesome start. So they've dug up Data's head, And they've also discovered a pocket watch, some bifocals, and bifocals, a pocket watch. Oh, and a gun, a Colt 45. And they're analyzing the head, and so then they go into this, right? First, the cool thing is that they're like, so Data is going to die in the 19th century. And Data's like, cool. That's kind of nice. And then, but Picard also was like, is it Lore? Could this be Lore? Is Lore back? I don't want Lore here. Is Lore here? Is that Lore? That's pretty much like the first thing he goes into. But apparently they have different phase discriminating amplifiers. I love this. Okay, this is nerdy. So Lore, Data explains that Lore has a type L phase discriminating amplifier, whereas Data has a type R. And I'm like, that's random. Like all these different, we don't know the science or what they have with it, but it's L and R, right? Left and right. And so I interpret it as being left and right phase discriminators. You can talk about circular polarization in terms of like left and right. Like you can talk about frequencies. We could pull on this thread. I'm just saying that there's some nuggets there. If you interpret the type L and the type R as left and right, we could maybe have something. So maybe it is left and right sides of the brain. Maybe they have their phase discriminating amplifiers in different parts of their brain. That's good. We can go with that. Awesome. See? And they never explained any of this. It was just, L and R. Anyway, they discover a microbial fossil, a cellular fossil, that is only from this planet Davidia 2. So they go there. As this is going on, they have this whole conversation about mortality and how Data is really comforted that he's gonna die someday now. He's happy with this news. He was worried about like dying and that he would never die and have to watch all of his friends die and then make new friends and then watch them die. And I don't want to get Picard spoilery here. That is a theme that comes up in Picard, and we can just leave it at that. But it's really interesting to have that conversation now. So if you didn't watch this episode, if you have watched Picard, go back and watch this episode because that conversation was really interesting. Anyway, underlying that point, Guinan is like, Picard, you need to go on this away mission. And he's like, why? She's like, can't tell you. You got to go on the away mission. And so he's like, oh, well, you're Guinan, so sure. And they discover a temporal disturbance here that's been localized on the surface. They find these triolic waves so they're no longer on Earth. They have gone to a cavern on the Davidia 2 planet, and they find these triolic waves there and temporal distortions. They run, I love this. Geordi was like, well, maybe we could run a spectral field correlation between the triolic waves and the temporal distortions. Now, again, triolic waves, they have never explained in here. All we know is that it's a byproduct of an energy source that's detrimental to organics. That's it. And, but running a spectral field correlation, it was such a good connection. Yeah, I love it too. But running a spectral field correlation, you would basically be wanting to see, okay, if there are distortions in the temporal field and there are these triolic waves, we could run a correlation analysis. That's valid to do that. Like, go Geordi. That's the right thing to do. The way you would probably do that is run a Fourier transform, do a Fourier transform analysis on each of those waves independently. If you can measure the distortions and you can measure the triolic waves, you do a Fourier transform, which, without making this a class on Fourier transforms, you basically pull out which frequencies are there. So if you have like a weird signal, you can run a Fourier analysis that'll say, okay, this is a combination of a frequency at this hertz, at this hertz, at this hertz, are all combined, and you're getting this. So you would run a spectral correlation to see if there are any shared frequencies. I love that. Anyway. All right. So they find this synchronic distortion that's going on that are from these areas that are giving off the waves. So synchronic, this is Data technobabbling, but he says there's a synchronic distortion with a positive displacement of 0.004%. What does that mean? Basically what it means is that they're out of phase with time. That they're like, well, does it matter? It's like, it's 1 part in 4 thousandths. So 1 out of, or 4 parts out of, anyway, it's in the thousandths that you have this slight offset with time, which we have also seen in the Voyager episode, Scientific Method. I'm really proud I remembered that name, where the aliens are cloaked doing the science experiments on the crew, and they're cloaked by being offset in time. So it's the same thing that's happening here. So they're off by 0.004%. And Geordi was like, well, does that matter? That if it's so close to us, are we able to see it? And he's like, it's either, whether it's fractions of seconds or years, it doesn't matter. We can't interact with them. And, ooh, that's good to know. I got to learn more about I don't play MMOs, so I stay away from Star Trek Online because I'm scared of them. But I should do that. That's really cool. A good way to think about that is to think about speed versus acceleration, right? Remember, we are advancing through time at 1 second per second. This is like walking at the same speed in a single direction. If you weren't able to see anything and you had another person who was right in front of you walking at the same speed, you would never catch up to them and you would never know that they were there. That's exactly what's going on here. They're offset by 0.004%. And they're progressing at the same rate. So just like walking, you would never catch up because you're all going at the same speed. So when they try to, and they're like, okay, well, maybe we can accelerate, right? They don't say that explicitly, but the idea is that, right, imagine that walking again. If you accelerated to where that person is, then you would be able to you would still be at the same speed. You would just have this short period of acceleration to get to that speed. So that's exactly what they're trying to do. And Geordi's like, 0.004 is tiny. That's tiny. We don't have any sort of chronoton time. He doesn't say chronoton, but we don't have any time. We don't have anything that could manipulate space-time to that level of precision. And Data's like, well, I can do it. and so it said that level of precision is built into Data's positronic decompiler. And that kind of makes sense because Data is Data and he's very precise. And so he has that level of precision, that level of accuracy that he would be able. Again, imagine like if you're trying to catch up to your friend who's walking here and you can't see them and you try to accelerate to catch up to them, but it's like, try to explain it. You wouldn't be able to precisely land there. And if you weren't able to know that you were precisely landing at where they were, then if you were offset, then you're still screwed, right? Because you tried accelerating, but you missed them and now you're still progressing at that same rate. So that's that tricky part with that. That's what they're trying to figure out. So he does adjust. He basically accelerates. We see him fade into accelerate his time into that future. And his description of what's going on is super creepy. I forgot how many horror-like episodes of TNG there are, but there's some creepy episodes in TNG. This is creepy. Even when he's just describing where he's like, oh, there's a big pod in the center and there's a bunch of like humanoid life forms with holes in their forehead that are being fed through this like what seems to be a tube. I'm like, jeez, oh man, I want to see that. It's like this gray, there's no features, but there's a hole in their forehead. Hard nope from me. Hard nope. Anyway, that's the science part. Data is now in this time zone. He sees them. What we then learn, agree. Super creepy. He jumps through this hole that we then learn. The way he describes it is kind of more complicated. He's like, I see an explosion and 2 people. But what we then learn is like, basically a wormhole. It's this 2 points are connected, 2 points in space-time are connected that they're jumping through. These aliens are jumping through. Data follows, ends up in the Earth in the 1800s. And plays poker with Gul Dukat. So if you haven't watched this episode recently, I was like, I know that face. That's Gul Dukat. It's the actor. It's not actually Gul Dukat, but this was before Deep Space Nine, so it's Gul Dukat. And back on the Enterprise, they're still struggling with needing a sensitive phase discriminator. They keep saying a sensitive phase discriminator to be able to do this. Yeah, it was amazing. I was like, is that? Yeah, it is. And so there's still a sensitivity issue. And this all just has to do with error margin, right? That we talk about plus or minus. So if their sensitivity in time is they only have things that are plus or minus to a millisecond, or what a bill. Yeah. Sorry. If they're plus or minus a millisecond, then they would still be off of this. So it's 1 part in, or it's 0.004 is what they're trying to get to, and their precision, their error is not good enough to actually be able to make this jump, to be able to align themselves. But they're working on it. Geordi is on it. Guinan's making a cocktail where she changes the evaporation point of the liquid, which is awesome, to be within half a degree of the person consuming it, and then it evaporates in his mouth. Yeah, and he's so recognizable too. Which I love. What they realize, being fans of other sci-fi series, what's going on with Guinan and Picard is a lot like what happened with River and the Doctor back in the Silence in the Library, where they meet and they're in different points in their time. So if you think of, it's like Guinan will meet Picard. She's further in their past. They've already met. They're coming back, and they say enough where Guinan is just like, oh, yeah, you know what's going on, but I don't know who you are yet. This is my first time meeting you, but it's not your first time meeting me. So it's pretty much like River and the Doctor. Really good episode. Yeah, like I said, it's a fixed wormhole. They do figure out how to get through there. And, let me see. There was stuff about how if they wanted to do it, they would travel to a time during a plague or an epidemic. They're in the cholera time, and I was a hard nope on that, so we're not going to talk about that, because I don't want to talk about it. But they're during the time of cholera. All these people are dying, and they're not realizing that they're dying because these aliens are killing them because there's so many bodies from the cholera. We'll just leave it there, because I started to feel anxiety about that. And fun call-outs to Jack London, though. That was pretty sweet. The eager bellhop. Mark Twain in this gave me serious anxiety as well. He is an agent of chaos. He is an agent of chaos in this episode. And it's hilarious, but it stresses me out. But one of Samuel Clemens. I was trying to figure out his name. I wrote in my notes, I was like, chaos of Clemens. Because he just keeps showing up and breaking the rules all the time and is like just inserting himself. And yeah, having Jack London there was pretty cool. That was pretty fantastic. I did love that. They're trying to, so they figure out that if they can tune a phaser to the frequency of the triolic waves that are resulting in these distortions, they're able to figure out the frequency of these triolic waves, and they're using the triolic waves to find where these aliens are. They see these distortions in space-time that are accompanied with that, and they realize that the distortions are all being focused, so they're able to go through this portal or this wormhole that's going on. Again, it's really hard to peel the science behind this back because triolic waves, there's no explanation for those other than that's kind of the byproduct of what is happening. The way these aliens are able to use their wormhole, their point in space and time that are connected, is through triolic waves. So, they're trying to figure out what to happen, and then things explode. Okay. Trivia. I'm so proud of this trivia. As soon as Samuel Clemens gets onto the Enterprise, so Samuel Clemens travels with him through to the Enterprise, because he's a chaotic human being. It's like, oh, cool hole. Goes through it. They're like, oh, Christ. We just stole Samuel Clemens. And he asks if they've seen Halley's Comet. And I was like, well, that's cool. And I know Halley's Comet, like, was predicted by Halley to come back in the 18th century. And that was like after he'd already died, it did come back. And when he predicted it would, where he realized that it was the same, there were like 3 observations of comets, and he postulated that they were the same comet that were traveling through our solar system, and said, okay, well, if I'm right, it's going to come back on this date in the 1700s. And that's exactly what happened. And so for Samuel Clemens, Mark Twain, to call out Halley's Comet, I was like, I wonder if Halley's Comet happened. Turns out there's a huge connection between Mark Twain and Halley's Comet. He apparently, this is like all anecdotal, of course, but he said he was famous for saying near the end of his life, I came in with Halley's Comet and I'm going out with Halley's Comet. He said that in 1909, and he died in 1910, just as Halley's Comet was coming out of its path behind the sun. And so, cool. Weird. But there obviously was something there. So I really appreciate that. It was awesome. They find, so Guinan is preserving the timeline. They're all like, tell us what happened to Picard, because Picard was left back in this explosion. And she's like, I can't, I have to preserve the timeline. And so Geordi, they have Data's body. Data's head got blown off, and it's still in the past with Guinan and Picard. Guinan is in her timeline, so she's not messing with that. She's staying where she's supposed to be. They're trying to figure out how to get Picard back. And they're like, well, we have Data's head. Like, let's just attach the head to the body and get Data working again, even though Data's head is also still in the past. Time travel, man. And it's not working. And then Geordi finds this iron filing in Data's head and realizes that there was a binary message left behind that is basically how to get them out of there. They're able to go back, but only one person, using a phaser to open up this portal. They figured out how to open up the portal, but only one person can go through. And so Samuel Clemens is like, well, I'll go, because I'm supposed to be in my own timeline. I'll go get Picard, and then he can come back. And yeah, I cannot. I 100% cannot. I would not know how to do that. Kudos to Picard. And they adjust the phaser by 0.047, so we got our nice number of 47 back here. And everyone gets back okay. Data's head is left behind. That's sort of the end of the episode. To stay there for 500 years, to be discovered, and to kick off these events to happen again. So it's this whole idea of what causes what. So really quickly in the last few minutes, we're going to talk about the Futurama episode Roswell That Ends Well, because Data's head was left behind for 500 years, so we can't not talk about this episode. And between this and Trials and Tribulations, we have almost hit every Star Trek reference in this episode. Futurama is one of my favorite shows. Had a big writing staff of scientists and physicists and mathematicians, so there's a lot of nerdy jokes in here. And it's all jokes. It's supposed to be funny. We're not supposed to find any science behind it, but there are these Easter eggs that are just brilliant. I love the opening of this episode. So this is season 4, episode 1, Roswell That Ends Well. It is wonderful. It opens with them watching a supernova. Fry says, I'm not going to requote the entire episode, but he's like, I've never seen a supernova, but if it's like my Chevy Nova, its explosion will light up the night sky. You would need to be at least 50 light years away from a supernova to be safe. So let's imagine that they're 50 light years away and not right up against it. However, okay, but they aren't totally safe, so maybe that's fair. My Fry's like, I don't want to miss it, and goes to microwave popcorn with those old stovetop popcorn makers that are all foil. It's covered in foil. And he just peels off the don't microwave and puts it in there. So quick point about why you can't put metal in a microwave. Metal arcs in a microwave, it arcs between two metallic points. So you could, although it is not recommended, do not try this at home, a spoon is theoretically okay. Because it doesn't have any points on it that you could that would arc, that would result in electric arcs. Because it's round the whole way. A fork will. Knife has points that will arc. Again, if there's imperfections in the spoon, and it does get really, really hot. So do not try that at home. But that's why you don't put metal in a microwave, because any points that could result in arcs will. I may or may not have played with an old microwave in college when we were going to throw it out because we got a new one. And so we went outside and microwaved everything we could find to see what happened. It was really fun. We did end up microwaving a type of bulb that you should not inhale the gas, so we had to evacuate. But we managed to measure the speed of light using a microwave. So you're good, Andy, no worries. So the popcorn thing will arc. Like, because it has all these folds, right? So you have all these points in metal that will fold over each other, and it will cause these arcs to happen. So, so he sets it in there. It starts sparking, as it does, and blue starts to happen. And Fry is like, why is there blue? Or does anyone else taste blue? And the blue travels, the red from the supernova travels, it meets, everything explodes, it creates a time portal that they get thrown into, and it's fabulous. They go through a time, it basically creates a hole in space-time, as one does. There's no science behind this. This is just the radiation from a broken microwave hitting the radiation of a supernova rips a hole in space-time. They get thrown back in time. They put on their seatbelts, except for Bender, which we've done Newton's third law of motion. In this episode, we have Newton's first law of motion. Why you wear a seatbelt. An object that is moving will continue to move unless acted on by a force. And he's like, seatbelts take more lives than they save. And then they hit, and Bender goes flying and explodes and results in all the debris that makes them think that, that's the alien in Roswell. It's such a good episode. It's such a funny episode. As they start to explain it, they have their high precision digital chronograph to measure the time. Again, actually, they'd use the GPS. They mention that there isn't any GPS in 1947, but the high precision digital chronograph is now turned into a pinup calendar. The professor explains this as sorry. I lost my train of thought. The professor explains this as the microwave radiation combined with the gravitons and graviolis from the supernova blasted us back in time. Let's unpack that. The microwave radiation. All right, that's electromagnetic radiation. It may have been amplified by the popcorn machine, right? The microwave radiation is electromagnetic, low energy radiation. The gravitons, remember I mentioned, are theoretical particles associated with gravity. If you think of gravity as a force, then graviton is its fundamental particle. It's theoretical, we've never detected it. Graviolis is a brilliant word. And to be fair, are as real as gravitons. It's just another word for it. So we can call gravitons graviolis all we want. Yeah, me too. Blasted them through time. And I'm okay with that. If you have electromagnetic radiation somehow collide with gravitational radiation, we'll go with that. It's brilliant. So they need to get a microwave. They need to get a microwave to be able to recreate this so they can open the wormhole. He said they tore the universe a new space hole, which is a wormhole. They traveled through time, and it's clenching shut. So it's collapsing. They have 24 hours before it's going to collapse. And they they have a whole lecture on messing with the timeline. Don't mess he says, now remember, we're back in time, so don't mess with the timeline unless you're supposed to mess with the timeline to result in the timeline happening. Time travel, man. Fabulous. They find that they try to find a microwave, but it's in 1947. They manage to find a microwave radar dish. So radars are radio waves that we bounce off of things in order to detect them. It has to be an emitting thing. So it's not a receiving dish, even though it looks like a receiver. It would actually be a microwave emitter that is sending out signals and then receiving them back. So we have a microwave emitter, radar dish, sure. Radar is technically radio waves, but microwaves are kind of close to radio waves, so we'll allow that to happen on this army base. Fry ends up meeting his grandmother. Remember, Fry's from the year 2000, so it's his grandfather is on this army base in Roswell, New Mexico. And he keeps trying to keep his grandfather from dying. There's no science. It's just a funny episode. And and it's hilarious. They keep trying to get this microwave dish back. Everyone's firing at them. They're all upset. The professor just goes, choke on that causality, and flies through and tears everything a new one. And then they bug out of there. But they forgot Bender's head. They left Bender's head behind. It fell out of the spaceship as they were taking off in the desert. And then Fry's all sad that Bender's gone once they get back to their timeline. And they just fly back to Roswell and pick up his head that's been sitting there for 1,000 years. Just like Data's head was sitting there for 500 years. So it was an excellent callback. All right. Anyway, that's all. I really appreciate you guys hanging out and goofing around with me. I hope you enjoyed that. Next week, we're going to be talking about 2 episodes from The Expanse. So we're actually going to be taking a break from Star Trek for a little while. If you want to suggest episodes to discuss during this, that's part of being a member of my Patreon. And voting on which episodes that we discuss is part of that as well. So you can check out, I have those links down there. And you can find me on Twitter and all those other things all down there. So thanks for hanging out. I hope you enjoyed that. That was a fun episode to end on. We will do more Futurama episodes. If you watched any of these for the first time, I hope you enjoyed them. Like I said, we'll do The Expanse next week. And I will be back on Friday to do my astronomy club at 1 p.m. Pacific time. So thank you again. Love to all of you. Stay safe. Drink water. Social distance. Stretch. Drink your water. Live long and prosper. Until next time. Bye.